Hi, I'm Jason Torres. I'm the lead campaign designer on Company Heroes 2, and you're watching Platform 32.
First released in 2006, Company of Heroes set the benchmark for tactical RTS games. Even today there are still hundreds of thousands of people playing the game online, with 254,000 unique players being recorded in March of 2012. So the recent announcement of the sequel has sent ripples of excitement through the ranks of RTS fans around the world. While the first game was set during the Battle of Normandy and covered only 4 months out of 6 years of war, Company of Heroes 2 takes place in Russia at the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, which became the bloodiest conflict of World War II, resulting in more than 14 million military casualties. At a recent First Look press event, I got to see the game in action and asked Jason Torres from Relic to tell me more about this epic sequel.
So Company Heroes 2 takes place in the Eastern Front, telling the story of the Soviet Red Army as they get invaded by the German Wehrmacht in 1941, all the way to the Battle of Berlin, which is the end of the war in 1945. The campaign is going to follow that story, which is actually really interesting because Company Heroes 1 had such a small focus. It told basically the story of the Battle of Normandy up until, if you include the expansions, right around Holland and A Bridge Too Far kind of time, which is really only 4 months. Company of Heroes 2 is a bit more ambitious in its storytelling, and we're taking on basically the entire Eastern Front in terms of breadth from 1941 to 1945. And it's really interesting because you have several periods in there where things changed hands. Things like Stalingrad, the Soviets held it, the Germans came and invaded and took it, and then the Soviets took it back again, but then the Germans took it with a counterattack. So you just have these really epic struggles over certain cities and certain territories that we get to kind of focus on in the campaign and show what that means for the soldiers on the battlefield.
Could you tell us a bit more about the multiplayer aspect of Company of Heroes 2? As with a game like this, I'm guessing that the majority of people will be playing it for the online portion alone.
So that's not exactly true. Our numbers find that it's not overwhelmingly multiplayer. But multiplayer is an important facet. I can't go too much into details, but I can confirm we will have multiplayer and you will be able to play the Soviet Red Army and the German Third Reich.
Okay, not as much detail as I would have hoped for, but good info nevertheless. One of the reasons Company of Heroes was loved so much was because of the authentic way it portrayed warfare. Company of Heroes 2 wants to tell the ruthless truth of war. What does this mean exactly?
The ruthless truth of war is one of those things that we set it kind of as a mandate for the project, and that's something that kind of bleeds into a bunch of things that we do. Everything from trying to focus on Stalin's Order 227, which told officers, soldiers are not to take one step back. They were expected, even if the situation looked like it was going sour, they were expected to fight until they die. And if they did not do so, it could be under the pains of death. They considered soldiers that were captured basically traitors because they didn't fight to the death. Those are things that are just completely foreign to kind of the Western armies and even the Western audience, not having heard that story really. So the ruthless truth of war breaks down into like campaign moments where we can showcase that. It breaks down into just having units like the conscripts of the Soviet Union and making them feel nearly expendable, because that's kind of how they were treated in the war. They weren't treated as like a super valuable resource in which they wanted to keep them alive. They were treated as like Quinn likes to say, it's a million hammers. It's I have a ton of stuff, throw it at the enemy and let's see what happens. So that's a remarkably stark tone that's different for Company Heroes 2.
During the presentation of early gameplay footage from Company of Heroes 2, we were told that every battle would tell a different story. Can you explain how this will happen?
Company of Heroes, the first one, is built in mind just to have these moments of kind of randomness. Things like a critical on a vehicle that makes it so it can't move temporarily, or a rear armor hit that penetrates so well it does something unexpected like completely blow up the vehicle, to things like troops getting pinned and not being able to do something that like they can't move around an object or whatnot. So it's really important to kind of have these things happen in the battlefield, and it's something that makes Company of Heroes different. So in Company of Heroes 2, we've really pumped up these things. Things like the dynamic line of sight, TrueSight, are going to give instance to more of these things. You can hide units better. because you don't have this circular line of sight around the unit anymore. It's a real line of sight system where there are objects that block the line of sight. I can suddenly hide a tank behind a farmhouse, and my enemy can stroll around the corner and get the biggest surprise of the match. And that's something that's just going to create these moments we're hoping for, where players are going to be like, oh, I can't believe you did that. How did you get away with that?
Cool. So, like, yeah, the players will have their own war stories.
Exactly. They're going to be able to say, like, I saw the tracks on your vehicle and I followed him. I knew you had it. I thought I heard it, and then I found the tracks and I took it out. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds immense. There are some new cover features in Company of Heroes 2. Can you cover the cover system for us? Cover?
Relic introduced area cover with Dawn of War 1, and then in Company of Heroes 2 we took that a step further for the authenticity, and we made it dynamic, so cover could be destroyed or created, and we made it directional, so you had to be on the right side of the wall. And the reason we made it directional was so we could make things like flanking and the tactical gameplay really important. So we've taken that further in Company of Heroes 2. Now you can be on the right side of that wall, but you can vault over it. And now you have a new path to your enemy, you have a new way to flank them, you have a way to get away from, say, a vehicle, you have a way to find a new escape route or find a quicker route to where you want to go.
Now, I mentioned before that we had seen gameplay footage at the preview event, and boy did it look good. Can you tell us how the new engine, Essence 3.0, has improved the look and feel of the game?
Essence Engine 3 is basically the technology that's making this all possible. When we knew what it was that we wanted to make, we knew we had to make new technology in order to make it. And that's what Essence Engine 3 does, is it pumps up the things that we loved about Company of Heroes 1 and improves them. It's the visual aspect of the visual presentation layer, the animations of the troops and how much more detailed and better we can make those, the visual quality of the troops. And how they look. Things like weather, like the snow. It's not just a white texture on being put over things. It's actually like it has thickness and depth, and it affects units moving through it, and they're going to trudge, and it's going to affect even the paths that you order units to move through. They're going to prefer to stay to the roads because they know they're going to move slower through the snow. So it's really Essence Engine 3 that lets us do all of these things.
Thanks, Jason. Finally, what would you say to all those hardcore Company of Heroes fans who cannot wait for the sequel? What can you say to them to get them super pumped for the game's release?
I think the thing that we would say is it's a new experience with the Eastern Front, and it's more. It's more ways to tactically take on your opponent, more ways to use things like cover and flanking, more just juice in the vehicles to make them feel bigger, to make the physics better, to make them feel more like the big monsters that they were dominating the battlefield. So it's just going to feel like a bigger experience.
There you have it, Company of Heroes fans. Tons of new gameplay elements and a bigger, more brutal gameplay experience await you in the first quarter of 2013, when you'll be able to take control of a commander in the Soviet Red Army and crush the Nazi invaders. For the motherland!